So, first of all, welcome to this second plenary session of the conference. Today we're going to have two speakers, Thierry Rocher and Andrea Avosto, giving us some impressions about, and thoughts about the use of data for policymaking. Our first speaker is Thierry Rocher. He has a PhD in psychometrics from the University of Paris 10, and since 2008 he has been working at the French Ministry of Education, where he now heads the Office for Student Assessment. Since in the 59th General Assembly of IEA, he was elected as chair of the board, and so in addition to the work as head of the Student Assessment Office of the Ministry of Education, now he is also, since January, the chair of the board of IEA. He will share with us some thoughts about the use of large-scale assessment from the perspective of national and international experiences. Thierry, thank you for being here with us, and without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. No, it's okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I will stand up in order to see you. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you for this introduction. First of all, I want to thank my dear colleague and friend Roberto Ricci for having invited me here. It's a real pleasure. On a very interesting conference, and it's also a real pleasure to be in Rome each time. I think it's the fourth time I'm in Rome this year, so we have a lot of connections together and with IEA, and I love Rome for it's so beautiful. I mean, one says it's the most beautiful city in the world. There is a kind of competition with Paris, I have to say, so I cannot judge on that because I would be biased, but anyway, I'm very happy to be here. As it was said in introduction, I will speak with two hats. In fact, I have two hats. My first hat is at the Ministry of Education, with a department which is a cousin, you could say, of INVALSI in a way. We'll see our activities. And on my other hat is on the international side, where I am the new elected chair of IEA. So there will be both two, let's say, perspectives in my presentation today. But before going to my presentation, I want to tell you a short story. This summer, I was visiting France, in the west of France. I won't say the name exactly because you will see why. And I was visiting an aquarium, a place where you can see a lot of species of fishes, of marine animals, etc. For kids, it's really wonderful. And there were some pedagogical information on some boards about environment and so on. And then I saw this graph. I don't know if you can see from the back there, but it's a pie chart, okay? With poisson is fishes, pêche, mammifer is mammals, there is birds here, reptiles, amphibian, and as maybe you have already noticed, but there is a small problem in this graph, or several problems in this graph. Okay, the 50% is not exactly the 50%. That's I think even if you are not very good in math, I think you can see it. But I mean, more serious is the difference between mammals and birds, for example. Birds is supposed to be 18%, mammals 9%. And I don't think the surfaces of the two, the red and the yellow, fit with the numbers. So, I'm a statistician by training, so I was really shocked when I was with my kids seeing this graph. So I tried to talk to a responsible of the aquarium and say to him, look at this graph, don't you see there is some problems? Then he looked at the graph, after some time he said, you're right. But it's only statistics. I mean, who cares? So that's my point today, is this sentence. In fact, it came to my mind that I also heard this sentence in the education world. I'm providing statistics, but most of the time, there is a tension between, let's say, rejection of the statistics or misinterpretation or misuse, and at the end of the day, it's only statistics. It's kind of sentence that we can hear a lot of time, also in education world. But today, if you are here this morning, on a Saturday morning, I think you cannot share this idea. I think you will agree with me that there's something wrong in this sentence. So today I want to talk, this is my point of view, is that from the data producer. Okay, I am a data producer at the ministry, at IEA. We are data producer in INVALSI as well. That's why this conference occurs, and it's a very nice idea. And I want to talk a bit about the role and responsibility we have as data producer. Because most of the time, there is a kind of behavior with my colleagues or even me saying that, okay, I produce some data, then I give it to you, practitioners or policymakers or teachers, and then just deal with it. And my job is not just finishing it. And I really think it's not the end of the journey for us as data producer. And I just want to give you some illustration in 3 fields. I mean, national assessment, international assessment, and e-assessment. E-assessment, digital-based assessment. I will not give an academic talk. It will be just more about sharing some experiences that we have in France and elsewhere in these fields and open, let's say, discussion, reflections on our role as data producer in this, in using data. So I want to start with my first theme about the student assessment in France. In France, just a bit of context. I won't go into details of this slide, but my department, we are responsible, we are within the ministry, and it's the Department of Statistics, and we are responsible for many assessment programs that we can identify, let's say, in 3 blocks. And the first block would be national sample-based program assessment, which can assess like subjects, which can be cross-sectional or longitudinal. There are different kinds of programs here, but it's sample-based and it's used to give some information for, let's say, policy purposes, especially. Then there are the international studies that you know, like PISA, we'll come back on it, or the IEA studies that you can see here. And there is more recently quite a huge development of national assessment, but on a census basis. That every kid today in France, they take assessment in grade 1, in grade 2, in grade 6, and in grade 10. So we have 4 grades, each time with 800,000 students. And that's why we started our collaboration with Roberto at that time and INVALSI, because we were in the same kind of, let's say, logistics or mess, same kind of mess when we started that, computer days and so on. So we started a very close collaboration at that time. And I will go mainly on this aspect of the national assessment on census-based, what it implies in terms of use. So let me just show you that the model we have for this national census assessment. The model is that, as I said, it's grade 1, 2, 6, 10, as you can see here. That means beginning of the primary school, beginning of the lower secondary school, beginning of the upper secondary school. And the idea is that these assessments are placed at the beginning of the school year. It's September, October, latest. Also, there is one objective, is the diagnostic. Positioning students, giving information to teacher in order for them to help and intervene for difficulties right at the beginning of the year. That's the main goal of this assessment, diagnostic goal. But there is another goal, it's monitoring. Because we can monitor the system with this assessment, not only on the national level, but also at the regional level, at school level, district level, etc. So for example, if I have some results of early grade 6 here, this is the outcome, in a way, of the primary school. So we can use that to have indicators of the outcome of primary schools at the district level, regional level, etc., etc. So that means we combine, we have one instrument, but two objectives. And that's a challenge. We all know that in literature, when you have an assessment program with different objectives, you have to be very careful, because here we try to combine the classroom teacher action with the local monitoring purposes. Just giving you an example, if the local monitoring purposes become with too high stakes, with too pressure, let's say, on schools, on teams, or it becomes an instrument of control, then we will have biased behaviors, and then it will not be useful in terms of classroom teacher action. So that's something we try to develop. We bet that it can work. I mean, we have some literature that it's difficult that to manage several objectives, but it's in other contexts. For example, in France, if we talk about accountability, for example, this is very soft accountability. There is no strong accountability. So we are not so worried about the bad consequences of having this kind of double objective. But still, we have to work on giving support and explanations at these two levels, individual levels and monitoring level. So what we do is explain, communicate, etc., etc. That means communication is really important for sure, but we also work with the National Scientific National Council for Education, which is a group of researchers, high-level academics in psychology, sociology, neuroscience, and so on. We work with them to elaborate this kind of instruments, especially for the early learners, because we try to detect some problem right at the beginning, in grade 1 and 2. And so we have to explain how these instruments are built, because it's not necessarily really in line with school practices sometimes. Sometimes the content of the test can be surprising for teachers who don't have necessarily the training in psychology or the newest, let's say, researchers in the field and so on. So we have a lot of communication to do, an explanation on the scientific, let's say, basis of our instrument. And also what we try to do is, that's here the limit of my job, is that we try to help to provide resources, pedagogical tools for every instrument, every dimension that we measure. So since we measure a dimension, that we provide some documentation or tools, or even software. Here is an app that can be used freely by schools. It's an app for early learners in reading, to work on the correspondence, and the letters and the sounds, okay, in phonology. So it was validated by scientific researchers, has proven some effect. So we try each time. We don't have an app for every domain we measure, but that's the aim at the end of the day, is to provide solution. So here, as I said, it's a bit the limit of my job, but I have to to put a lot of implications in this work, because it's not only the authorities in pedagogy that can do the job. I have to be there as a measurement specialist to say, okay, it fits, and here how we can work together. Also for the local monitoring. In France, we have a chance to have in each region educational statistical departments. And then some of these departments, they develop tools. They do a lot of things on the regional level. Like here is an example of a data visualization near Toulouse in the southwest of France. By the way, a very nice region if you want to go there on vacation. The food excellent. If you don't know, I would advise. Near Toulouse, and I'm not from there. But then these tools, the idea is that they can be shared by any other districts to do monitoring. And that's the idea, to build a community around using the data and the tool here, the visualization, but there can be many other ways to do that around all fronts. Okay? That's also our job, is to coordinate and to stimulate all these networks and communities. That's really important to build this, because then we share the double objectives that I was talking about. Everybody could be on the same page and avoid some risks. And last but not least, because we are talking about that also a lot in this conference, is about data to support research, because then we have a huge amount of data. You can imagine 3 million pupils assessed every year. I mean, I know that INVALSI is the same, so we have like a huge amount of data, very useful for research. I just distinguished here two kinds of research that can be made. That means, of course, you can use this data for research in itself. I mean, in psychological development of the kids, with sociological analysis, analyzing disparities and so on. So there are many fields using this data in itself to do a lot of research. But there is another field also, and Giorgio was talking about that a bit yesterday, that a lot of researchers, they come to us and they say, okay, I have an intervention program and I want to evaluate the effect of my intervention program. So I did a randomization, and then I want to use your data as an external assessment of the progress of my pupils, whether they are in the intervention program, whether they were not. So that's more and more the case now, that we have these demands that are really legitimate, but the problem is also in practice. I mean, we have to manage all this. Fortunately, in France, we don't, fortunately and unfortunately, I would say, we don't have thousands of researchers in education. That's a pity, but for the moment it starts slowly. But be more and more means and PhD students in the field and so on. So I think the beginning on something, but we have to organize this from a practical point of view, how to simplify the access, for example, while maintaining confidentiality, security, let's say technical, also, yes, I was talking about security, but how can we manage that security and confidentiality while giving access? This is a huge challenge for us, and I'm happy to discuss and see and learn here what happens, because I think there is the same problem on this side of the Alps. And I want just to finish on the national assessment to say that there will be the creation, it's by law, the law was voted, there will be the creation of a council of evaluation, and one of the main missions will be to oversee and organize the evaluation of the schools. It can seem a bit strange, but in France there is not an organization about evaluation of schools. It's something that we don't really do, something we do locally, but I mean very on a qualitative basis. There is not a systematic, for example, review or auditing, let's say, or any kind of assessment or evaluation that are really thought and organized in a standardized way, let's say, or at least in something that is thought in advance. So the key challenge for this council of evaluation will be to define a framework first, for sure, the first step, and also to develop this culture of evaluation, because for the moment in France, school directors, for example, if I'm talking about lower secondary schools or upper secondary schools, they don't have so much this culture of evaluation and use of data. So there's a huge field in it to make some progress in, let's say, data literacy, data use, how to build some action plan based on data, etc., etc. So that's something we necessarily have, as my statistical department will be, of course, implied in this, because we are the data producer, we have to be in this kind of dialogue with all the people. So that was my point about, let's say, crossing the border and going further than just providing data on national assessment. Right now, my second theme I would like to address is on international assessment, and here I want to talk more about how to prevent some misuse of the data in international assessment. So as you know, international comparison, I mean, the world is fan of rankings. We love rankings, we want to rank all the countries, and not only in sports, I mean in every field. So I tried to find a ranking for France and Italy that could be very, let's say, give advantage to both countries. And I will not talk about football, okay? Because then we will have to argue together, and I don't want to go that way, and we can have the coffee break maybe. But France and Italy, I found a ranking that France and Italy, we are first in this ranking. It's the time spent in eating and drinking. And as you can see, France and Italy were about 2 hours per day. If you compare, for example, to Canada or US, it's 1 hour. So it's an OECD survey, so it's something very serious, I think. Yeah, just go there. He will confirm afterwards. So we are the best here. I mean, we can all be satisfied about that. But I don't know why it's not so mediatic. I think I want to send that to every newspaper in the world and say, look, France and Italy, we are first at the end of the day. But unfortunately, that was not the main goal, I mean, of our society. We can discuss that. But... So my point was, here is we're joking, of course, but it's about the popularity, and I want to talk about the media focus, and especially on PISA, because it's really more mediatic than other surveys. And here it's another thing I have to explain a bit, because next week, of course next week there will be the PISA release. It will be everyday headlines for 2 or 3 days, or maybe 1 week maximum, but then it will disappear in the air. Of course, not from our reflections, because we are specialists, but I mean, there is a big media impact, and sometimes with very not qualitative covering. So, and here it's an expression in France, the Beaujolais Nouveau is a wine, and then here this phrase is, we wait for the PISA study as we wait for the Beaujolais Nouveau. And just to explain you, Beaujolais Nouveau is a very young wine. It's the first wine you can drink, and it was like 3 weeks ago or something in Paris, and it's a huge event. There are every bar, there's a Beaujolais Nouveau, and you cannot escape to the Beaujolais Nouveau if you are in Paris that period or in France. So but it's a very commercial also event. It lasts 1 day, and then we forget about it. The wine is not so good, is really to sell in the first wine. It's like a marketing purpose. And so here, as you can see, the journalist, he said he compared PISA to the Beaujolais. And I think it's a pity, because it should not be that. I mean, it's great that we can have a lot of covering and so on, and press, but it should not be like 1 day thing, and we have to work on that. So what we do, in France, for example, we did that this week, is about, we train journalists. We said to journalists, this week, it was on Tuesday, yes, we invited them and said to them, okay, we are not going to give you any results of PISA 2018, don't count on that. Even if you torture us, you will get nothing. That's the thing we say, because we really respect the embargo of the next Tuesday. But we said we are going to explain to you how it is built, how it is constructed, what can you say about it, what are let's say, the interesting thing, the not interesting thing, what you cannot say about it, etc. So we try to avoid misuse, and we try also to orientate, let's say, to some key messages that they could be useful for the public debate, and not just France is 25th out of 40 or whatever. So just to give you some illustration, so we talk about rankings and say that it's not the more interesting outcomes, just by saying that there is more variation within countries than between countries, which is very typical. Like we looked at some maps yesterday, and it was very clear that within Romania, we saw yesterday, or Italy, there are huge variations, and bigger than between countries. And we talk about also correlation and causality, and also the fact that there is no one size fits all. It's another topic. So I will come back on that. Just on correlation and causality, I want to just to say to you that we as a data producer, we also have a responsibility. We have to be careful about that. Just an example here. It's from PISA. It's a graph with comparing let's say the level of valuing by teacher, in percentage of teacher, let's say that their profession are valued in society, and the percentage of students that are most proficient in maths. Let's say. And as you can see, I don't know what you can see, but what we can see here is a regression line. And for me, I have to say, and I always say that to my OECD colleagues and friends, or to my researchers, colleagues and friends, I say, be careful, because here, between statisticians is okay. I mean, you have a regression line, and you know that if you skip Singapore or Korea, maybe your regression line will be flat. You don't know about that. So there is 2 points, and maybe, but we can talk between us, between researchers on this graph. But once this is in the population, in the media, and so on, then there is not only a correlation, there is a causality, and then one says, okay, so we have to value teacher profession, which is, I mean, of course we have to value teacher profession. But then we are going to raise our rank in PISA by valuing. There is this passage from correlation to causality that are quite dangerous, because it's very multifactorial. So we have always to say that, and let's say that the things are not simple. Okay, and this is just another thing to laugh a bit is about. An example I like to pick, it's on a website called Spurious Correlation. It's a very nice website. And here's a correlation between the number of people who drown by falling into a pool and the number of films Nicolas Cage appear in a year. Okay? And as you can see, it's very correlated. There is a huge correlation. I don't know why. Here, the reason why I don't like Nicolas Cage personally, it's not my favorite actor, but I won't go into a pool drawing myself. That's your choice. So just to say that this kind of things, it's so, I mean, easy to go from correlation to causality, and something we, as data producer, we have a responsibility in reminding that to the public, to the audience. Another thing is about what we call the cherry picking in international assessment. We say, oh look, Korea is first or Finland is first, and then we are going to do like them and implement the same policy. This is, maybe you have seen, there was the IES study, ICLS, on information and computer literacy study survey. That the release was the 5th of November this year, so maybe you have seen it in a publication or in the press. And so the country that participates, you can see here, and there was 2 countries like Denmark and Korea that had a very high score compared to the other. They are like 553, 542, so their performance were very high. But the very interesting thing, if you look in the statistics, in the tables, in the numbers, these 2 countries, they are different in almost every policies or practices. It's amazing if you go through the report. For example, using ICT at schools for school purposes. In Korea, like it was 5% on a daily basis, and in Denmark it was 80%. So just to give you an example that the organization of the system, the teacher practices, the attitude and so was so different, and still they are very performant. So how do you do cherry picking in this case? It's very very difficult. So the idea is that a producer, and I'm responsible for that, is to say we have you are national experts. So you know how to interpret. You may have some ideas about how to take some, let's say, ideas or inspiration from others. because you know your context and your history and so on. So that's really the meeting between international surveys that are, I mean, for me it's more than necessary to have these international surveys, but you really have to have a national look on that and to cross with your knowledge about the context. So just to give you an example here about what in France, a short example of a lesson we learned quite recently with PERS. So PERS is on a reading literacy survey. It's in grade 4 at school on reading comprehension. And here it was the ranking on PERS 2016, and as you can see, France is here. That means this is the European countries, this is the European mean, and this is France. So for us, it was our ranking in PERS is very worrying for us. It's something that we are very concerned about the results of the primary schools. If you look at the PERS content, what is assessed in PERS, it's reading comprehension, but on a very, let's say, the most complex competencies and skills. It's not just only taking some information in a text. It's really to go through a long text, 6 pages, and to really understand deeply the meaning of the text, and also to have some metacognition, etc. So it's a quite complex skills assessment. And what we observed in France is that here you cannot see really, but the European bar is in green and France is in blue. And if we ask to teachers, what do you do in reading comprehension in your class? At least once a week it was here. They often say, locate information within a text. Of course, a lot. Identifying the main ideas, of course, a lot. But when it comes to describe the style or structure of the text, or compare what they have read with experiences they have had, that means here it's really metacognition, or connecting things on the cultural environment and so on, is much more complex. We see that French teachers, they less do these practices. And we knew a bit about that because we have also observation from the inspectorate, we have national studies, etc. So it was a confirmation here that our teachers, when they work on reading comprehension, they just provide short text to students and they say, okay, what is the color of the hat of the lady in the text? And that's it. And so we know that we have a problem here and a training to do. So we really realize in our system that this component were really missing in training the teachers. So it was like a warning signal that all the inspectorates, they understood and they tried to improve on that. So that, you see, there is no one lesson fits all, let's say, if I can say, and here it's just an example of how we can do. It's our responsibility to cross this kind of lesson. Right, now I will talk about my third theme on data use and our responsibility in using data, providing data. And I will talk about e-assessment, digital-based assessment. And we have developed, and also with a group of countries, the FLIP group, for example, with France, Luxembourg, Italy, Portugal, and Brazil, and many others. Now we are in an association, and we shared a lot of ideas and products in terms of e-assessment. Digital assessment, as you can see, it can be in math. They can have some interactive situation, like so the students interact with a fake student, let's say. We have in computational thinking things, in science, and more explanatory things on collaborative lab and MAGMA. So a lot of fancy things. It's very nice to have that. But the problem is, it's not the typical situation. We don't have the student, they don't answer with the right answer, and then we just identify the correct answer, and then we do statistics. It's much more complex, and we have a lot of so-called log data. And I just want to show you an example of an exploration in these new types of data. So there is the new types of data we have to handle. So here it's the form is a bit greedy, I don't know why, but it's not important. But here you have a situation in math, you have two trees here, and you have age, and you have some points that are here in that blue or orange. And then you have to find out when the two trees, at what age the two trees they will have the same height. Okay, that's height. Sorry. So that's the idea of the simulation. And then you can use, as you can see, you can use a pen, you can use a ruler, you have some a calculator, so you have some tools to be used if you want for the students. So it's grade 9 students, okay? And here, for example, you have students that try 200, for example, then he take a pen, then he try to draw some lines, so we can see that these students, he may have an understanding of what is a function, for example. So that's the thing, that's the data we just gather for this kind of 10-second thing I just showed you before. So we have the use of the tools, we have they enter data in the table, etc., etc. There is a time as well, at which time they do what. So we have now a lot of data, and the question we have is, and it's very easy to have this kind of data now. That's the difference between some years ago, even though there are some problems in storage and so on. But the real question now is that in all this data, is there signal in the noise, I will say. There is a lot of noise. Students, they play with tools, they do a lot of things we cannot control, and then can we just extract some relevant information from this data? That's the new, a really new field in large-scale assessment. Even international, OECD start to doing this in the process data. IEA will as well. We do in France and other countries, so it's really a new field. But for that, what we argue is that you need a theory. That means if you think you are going to assess to find something like just from scratch and the truth will appear from the data somewhere, it doesn't work. So you need an even stronger theory than before in a traditional assessment. Here, just to show you that the theory was from didactics about the understanding of the concept of functions. And there are two possible approaches for students at that age. Understanding of function like input-output thing, the box, you have something in input or something, you give something in input, you have something in output. This is the first, let's say, operational approach. And the second approach is more structural approach. That means you have an understanding of the shape of the function, of some math properties of the function, the growth, for example, etc. So we have these two kind of profiles, and we did some, so we use data science for that. That means modern, sometimes not so modern, I mean, because sometimes it can be very old statistical methods that we can apply now because we are more powerful in IT. But we use the techniques of the so-called data science, and we identified 4 groups so far, and distinguishing, hopefully, the operational approach and the structural approach. For example, here, the operational approach that they can success in orange or they can fail in red. These students, they try a lot of values in the table. They have quite a high standard deviation. That means the disparities between their values is quite high. They alternate a lot, so they have like a dichotomization process, etc. Compared to the other one on the green and blue, the structural approach, they don't enter so much data, but for example, they use the pencil. And using the pencil is certainly a sign that they are much advanced in the comprehension of the function. So that's the findings, okay? That's very interesting findings, but these are also assumptions behind. At the end of the day, what we want to do is that to provide 4 profiles and say to the teachers, okay, it's not just failure or success, is maybe an understanding on the procedural, on understanding on operational, or understanding on structural. So that's the target, is to also come cross to another border, which is from standardized assessment, summative assessment, to formative assessment in a way. And then that's the next step of this kind of item. So, but for that, we have done all this work in data science, which is great. I love it. I'm a statistician. But we need some validation. Our responsibility is to be sure that there is a kind of validity there. And then what we do, what we develop a lot now with some researchers from different backgrounds, is to have a user experience approaches. That means we observe students solving the problems with different methods. It can be eye tracking. This is like here, for example, there is an eye tracking system to see what they are doing, to understand how they proceed in their process, let's say, how they process. And we use interviews, we use classroom observation, etc. So it's like we try to have a 360 degrees approach to really validate our findings, because it's the with this new data, there are new responsibilities, I would say. And I was talking about are we sure about what we are saying? That's the main goal here. It's to ensuring the validity. So, to recap, I think you would agree with me. It's much more than statistics. I have talked about supporting, communicating, develop data literacy, develop like a culture of evaluation, of assessment, of data, and also to innovate, to provide tools, to go to some borders. As a statistical department, we don't go often, so we have to move now to all these borders. I mean, to pedagogy, formative assessment, etc. So we have a lot of warning on policy interpretations. So the idea is that now we try to build a community. That's I think the idea also of this conference is to build a community around using data from the school level to the policy level. And I think it's really, really interesting. I think it's really the thing to do now, to gather some people, not working for people, but working with people all together, with practitioners and the user directly. So that's why I think really this conference is important for me, because I want to come back to my aquarium and say that the idea is how we are going to build an ecosystem altogether with different views on data, with different, let's say, interests, different backgrounds and that level of understanding, etc. So we have really to build that, and I will bring back also in France this idea of the conference. It gave me a lot of ideas to start stimulating this kind of event. I think it's also very important to have some meeting like this. So thank you very much. Grazie mille.
Thank you, Thierry. Rather than a statistician, you've been a mathematician, because there is no noise here. You stopped right on time, actually even earlier, so we have a little bit more time for questions, and I guess that the first thing to do is to open the floor. Any questions to Thierry? Well, while the audience... voilà. Please come. Actually, please come over, yes, and introduce yourself when you ask the question.
My name is Marcos Pampinato. I'm doing research on culture and education, and I'm interested in that in the example about structural and operational understanding of a function. I just like to know whether you are talking about people at the same students, the same age, and if you did some kind of cultural observation in France. I mean, about preferences between groups living in France, north, south, east, regions. Students develop different preferences in regardless or because of different kind of school approaches or teacher approaches to the math. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, yeah. Thank you, Aaron. In the case of the process data, yes, I think we are going to do some kind of, at least like gender analysis to see if there are some different behaviors. For example, because as ICLS shows that there are some difference between boys and girls, and not in the way that we can think. For example, girls were really better in ICLS than boys. And the reaction and the process, I agree with you. It's something that really can be done. Here, I think I'm not sure we have the big sample enough, but we are going to also see that with the socioeconomic background, which is also a preoccupation we have, especially when coming to digital assessment. That may have an impact linked to the familiarity of the students with this kind of interaction. So that's, I think, mainly the big two variables that we use in gender, socioeconomic status. Afterwards, it's on administrative data. Here we depend much more on administrative data. We don't have not so much data, but we organize, we just talked about some longitudinal surveys before talking here. And we have big longitudinal surveys in France, and we have a lot of information, but really a lot on the background of the students, the family structure, family habits, family resources. We talk about immigration, origin, etc. So that there's a lot of, in this kind of surveys that we use to do that, exactly what you do, what you talk about. But it's much more on the, not so thin grain, but much more on how students, they perform at school, the school path, and so on. But that would be interesting, definitively. I take your point on how we can do that. And region as well is something that we really go into more details with the national census-based assessment I talked to you about. Important on the region, you were talking about the region, we really work more closely with geographers now, because of course with all the educational science is impacted, especially also in France, with the socio-economic status, weight, the reproduction, Bourdieu, etc. So that's something very important, but sometimes it doesn't explain some differences, and geography entry can explain much more sometimes, especially in France. So that's a new perspective that we develop a lot now in our analysis.
Yes. Please come over.
So, Agostino Portera, University of Verona. First of all, thank you very much. You are very interesting and very stimulating talk. And I think I and most of the people here agrees that we do need statistics. This is, I think, there are no doubts. But the problem is, how can we prevent that we or other people can misuse statistics? I think this was your issue. And I would like to reflect together with you what we could do. And perhaps I have two, I don't know, ideas. Perhaps you can have more. I would like to listen to your opinion. First of all, I think perhaps it's also a responsibility of statistics. That to say, be careful and don't make so causalities, so easy or superficial causality. Because if you give the state, I think human beings are like that. Oh, I am bad, so I have to do something more. But what more? I don't know. So I think it could be important to give not just a date, but also some kind of, how can I say, explanation. So like, jokes to say, be careful, don't use like this, don't make easy causality. And secondly, I would say, perhaps, I am thinking a new idea that I very much share from ecosystem. In ecosystem, everybody should have a chance of survival, to be listened. Perhaps could be important or necessary to add also more qualitative research. Not just quantitative, which are of course very important, but also more qualitative research so that we can understand more of the dates, and then so we can offer both, so the quantitative studies and qualitative, which more deeper, and I would say also local analysis, and not just this world comparative. Thank you.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's exactly, I get exactly your point. I mean, on the preventing or supporting good use, let's say, of the data, and also adding some qualitative research. I think you're really right. But sometimes the dialogue is not so easy. For example, I just give you an example, is about individual feedback. I was about to talk about that, but it was a bit long, but we provide individual feedback. It's a diagnostic test. But we know we do a lot of measurement error, because we assess a student with some items, but we would have taken other items. We know as statisticians, psychometricians, that if we say you have 8 points, but maybe you could have 6 points or 10 points, and there's like a confidence interval, and we can provide as well at an individual level, but it's very large, because we are an individual level, not at country level. And then we wanted to prevent the stigmatization of students. Say, oh, this student is in this box. It does not master the competence. This student is in the other box. And we wanted to say, look, there is probability that the students can be on one box and another. But we started some work on that with teachers, but the immediate feedback we had is, you have some errors, so we cannot trust you. And so we were like in an honesty, just to say we are very modest as statisticians. We know that we do error, and we can just show you the error. But then we lose the trust between everyone. So it was not a good idea. So now we do exactly what you said. That we try to communicate a lot and to embed these people to say, look at all the risks possible. Stigmatization on students is one risk, very important risk. Just be careful about that. So it's much more general, because we cannot go into more detailed sophistication. But that was on the first one, a case like this. And on the qualitative study, I fully agree. That's why, for example, I just show you the user experience idea on the process data. This is very important I'm very convinced about the complementarity of both. And the Council of Evaluation, that will be also the target for the new Council in France, because they will have to use data, of course, objective indicators, but also at some point to find some qualitative indicators, at least, I don't know if we can call it indicators, but I mean outcomes, qualitative outcomes on the real functioning of the school. And it's a real challenge, and I fully agree with you. There would be a lot to say.
There are Roberto, the lady in the second row, and then for the sake of time, I would like to know if there is other questions, because then we will eventually collect them and ask Thierry to respond at once. So please raise your hands so that the mic reaches you.
Thierry, thank you very much for your inspiring talk. Thank you so much. I have 2 questions or 2 remarks. First of all, I think we have to take into account, and we'd like to know if you have some suggestion in this direction about the dimension of the process. Oh, sorry. We have to share our data to schools, teachers, and a lot of people, and we have to take into consideration the problem of the dimension of the issue, first of all. And so if you have some experience in France to share with us, because we are struggling a lot on this topic, how to reach really effectively teachers or a larger group of people, first. Second, I entirely agree with you and the other colleagues about the caveats about the use of the data, but to be entirely honest, I think it's our duty as researchers, as statisticians, as people working in this field, to find also the way to give to our audience significant and relevant results. we have to go outside our field of research, because if we remain on our field just to show them only the caveats, the consequence of that is at the end of the day, I see so nice data, so nice methods, but at the end of the day, I need some interpretation of that. So I think we have to take into account about the limits, but we have to be humble, very humble on that, and provide also interpretations, solutions, of course with the limits of our interpretation. But I would suggest to answer of this duty call, to give them interpretation, because yes, we can speak about causation or misinterpretation, but if we just show correlations, just methods, they are only to try to find simplistic solutions. So I don't know if you agree with that and you have any solution. So we are not to be only researchers, only to see our the part of our job, but also the use of the limits.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's as I said, the role and responsibilities is much more than giving data. And I fully agree. How do you give some keys to interpret the data, some limitation, without saying that the data are low quality? So that it's a real dialogue, my feeling is that we, as I said, with this ecosystem, that we have to build it all together, find ways to put on, to right at the beginning, to bring some practitioner teachers at the table to think about their comprehension, because I can be the best statistician of the world, I may not have the good representation of how it will be perceived by the end user. So I think it's really something I fully agree with. And on our first point, it was about do you reach with thousands of teachers? Yes. That's a huge problem. And in France, but we are a very centralized system in a way. So we have the ministry, the district, and then the hierarchy is very clear. So even if we have, for example, primary school, we have 50,000 primary schools. We have also, like here, a big trouble because it's very small schools around the country. 50,000, you can imagine how to reach 50,000 school practices and data use and so on and blah blah blah, knowing that there are 1,000 inspectors, let's say, so they have to manage 50 schools each. So that's a real challenge to organize that. And for the moment, we try to really to have a step-by-step approach. I mean, first step is to train the leader, let's say, the head, the inspectors or district leader, and so on. And then hopefully they can have because from the ministry, I mean, I cannot talk to 500,000 teachers. I mean, it's impossible. And also the culture of teachers, I don't know if it's the same in Italy, but the culture of teachers in France is much more oral than on reading. They don't necessarily read articles or this kind of thing. They don't have the approach that a researcher may have. There's much more in a community sharing experience. It's much more oral tradition. It's something that has been shown by some sociologists. And then how do we deal with that? That's I agree. It's a real challenge. I don't think we are really at the beginning of having this impact. That's the most important, to touch the black box which is in the classroom between the teacher and students.
The lady in the second row. Other questions?
Michela Agnaldi from the University of Perugia. Thank you for your stimulating presentation. I would like to comment on a specific point that you made in your presentation, and specifically when you said, you claimed you need a theory to make the assessment strong. Well, I think this is the very point of educational assessment nowadays. We all know that this big data, log data explosion brings big potentials. But I think we all agree that these big potentials are not exploited yet. And part of this difficulty is technical, but not much. Actually, we can rely on people with very high ICT competencies to obtain millions of patterns of behaviors of students when trying to resolve questions. The point is that we are not able to interpret these millions of patterns. So we really do need interpretations. We do need a theory to frame all these patterns so that we go in the direction of this cognitive diagnostic assessment, which needs a profiling of units based on a number of sub-dimensions of competencies. But if we don't have an interpretation, a solid interpretation of all these millions of patterns that we actually are able to draw, then we won't go in the direction of cognitive diagnostic models.
And one last question from Andrea, and then we go to the second.
Thank you. The question is on functional assessment. You showed us you basically have assessment at the beginning of every cycle, college, licentiate, but not at the end in correspondence with the baccalaureate. And obviously, so why so? And we know the baccalaureate is going to change, it's going to be reformed. So you're thinking to introduce standardized assessment at this stage?
That's a sensitive question. Yeah, historically, the baccalaureate is something really for what the so-called we call the general inspectorate. That means the head of designing the curriculum. So it's really the end of the secondary school, and the culture of standardized assessment is really not implemented in the baccalaureate. For example, marking. I shouldn't say that I'm a civil servant, but I have to say that the marking, for example, the marking procedures of the baccalaureate are quite weak compared to what we do in our standardized assessment. I mean, open-ended essays and so on. There's a lot of error in it, and we know all that. And even between regions, the so-called juries, the harmonization of the juries is something we use. Harmonization. We don't know exactly what it means, but statistically, so there is the tradition of standardized assessment in baccalaureate is very, and it's something I don't see future change in that. I mean, in the mid-term, maybe in long term. So yes, but that's a real problem if you compare to other countries. Like I know a lot of examinations in UK. You go for examinations in UK. There's a lot of research comparing different examination, marking system, and so on. We are really far from that, and so that's a pity. But that's the heritage of history.
Thank you, Thierry, for a very